Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our final webinar of Admissions Connect. I am very pleased to welcome Cathy Campbell, who I think is quite well known already. Cathy's worked for a number of leading schools in the past and now runs Pair Education, in which she supports schools with a range of consultancy projects from admissions audits to international recruitment strategy reviews. Cathy is also a co-trainer on the ANCIS Diploma in Schools Admissions Management as well. Today, Cathy is here to talk to you about all things statistical and how you can best use your statistics to help report. If anybody has any questions, the usual thing to do, put them in the Q&A and then I will pose those to Cathy at the end. Cathy, thanks ever so much for being here today, and over to you.
Thank you, Tommy. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and a little bit of a shame that the last session is on statistics, not the most exciting topic, but let's see what I can do to make it as exciting as I can. I'm now going to see if I can just share my screen. Get my first slide up. So here we are, the first slide. Well, as George Bernard Shaw once said, it's the mark of a truly intelligent person to be moved by statistics. Now, I clearly can't claim to be that intelligent, as statistics don't always move me, but sometimes on the odd occasion they do. And this afternoon, I'm going to share a few tips with you relating to how you can shed a more vibrant light on your statistics. Now, it really is a great moment, and I'm sure we've probably all experienced it at some stage, when we see a result pop up in one of our data reports or graphs that tell us something new. For example, we see an unexpected upturn in pupils from a new feeder school. Perhaps we see more girls applying for Year 9 places. But for the purposes of this afternoon's session, let's make sure that we focus on it being the indication of something very positive. Once those statistical diagnoses have been made, we are now faced with the pleasure of reporting the findings. And whilst the statistics themselves may be absolutely fantastic, they alone will not guarantee a successful presentation. So how can we share our findings in an effective, meaningful, and memorable way? Well, first of all, I just want to say a few things about collecting the statistics. Before we can present anything, we need to be absolutely sure that the data that we have used has been collected accurately. Your data must be credible. The story you are sharing may have significant strategic and financial consequences for your school, so make sure that your statistical foundations are absolutely rock solid. So why do we need to measure what we do? Well, basically, here it is in a nutshell. But we need to make sure, increasingly, that we do this in the most cost-effective manner possible. The most effective manner to do this is by having a really, really trustworthy database. Now, today we may be experiencing more inquiries, we may have more people needing more care, but there is no increase in the number of staff in our department. And this makes it even more important that our data is supporting our admissions and marketing activity accurately. For example, if you're not currently adding every single inquiry you receive to your database, how can you actually prove to your line manager that you are busier than you've ever been and you actually need additional staff support? Now, I visited a few schools recently who've said to me, we simply don't have time, Cathy, to add all the international inquiries. But how can you convince your governors that the market is buoyant or that you need extra staff if you don't even have the evidence to prove your case? So what can we measure? We can measure who they are. And we do this by running a list of inquiries. We can measure where they come from. And we do this by looking at the area in which they live, the agent who's recommended them, or the feeder school that the children are currently attending. How have they found us? Well, we measure this by the source of inquiry. And we need to know how many pupils we need in order to meet our targets. Make sure that you are recording all the different elements of your data story comprehensively. Another example is that in the last couple of years, you will all have recognised that more families have been deferring, withdrawing, reapplying due to nervousness surrounding the pandemic. Now, whichever database you're using, make sure that your data reflects the additional time that is taken on servicing these families. So, for example, if it's a case of withdrawing a pupil and then re-entering them, make sure you do that, because then it will reflect the time you're spending on looking after these families. Who are they? Do we actually know who we're looking for? Are we certain that our school needs more day pupils, or are the governors and SLT planning to open a new boarding house in 3 years' time, and we perhaps haven't been made aware of that? Because if that's the case, we need to make sure that we haven't filled those places with day pupils who apply early, when actually we need the boarders who are applying later. Where are they coming from? Are you sure that you're noting the postcode areas, the countries of origin, the feeder schools by type, and the agents by type? How have they found us? This old chestnut, are you asking the right questions when they first inquire? This is really critical. Just saying, how did you hear about us, doesn't give you the answer you need. What you really want to be answering is, what prompted you to call today? Or why did you send the email today? You'll get different answers. Do you know what your targets are? Do you need more girls? Do you need more boys? Do you need more nines? Do you need more scientists? Do you need more pupils from Europe? And so on. You'll all be familiar with these questions, but I think it's important just to remind ourselves of the sort of information that our databases need to be holding in order to be supporting us accurately in our activity. Before we move on to the next stage, I just want to make sure that you're all aware that your database isn't the only source of information when you're looking to put a presentation together for statistics. The ISC, as I'm sure you all know, release a census every year, which contains some fantastic information. Sometimes it's a little bit confusing, certainly with the internationals, to work out what it's telling us. But they're very, very helpful if you give them a call or drop them an email. And also remember that the data is gathered in January. So for example, if you're looking at data on short-term stays that happen in the autumn term, they might not be included in the data. They also have a really effective benchmarking tool. Some of you again may be aware of this, some may not be, but it's fantastic. It allows you to benchmark your school against all the other ISC member schools, and it's free. Office for National Statistics, again, if you want to look at pupil numbers in the coming years, that's a fantastic source. And also colleagues in the sector, they really are your friends, and make the most of them. If you think that there is a downturn nationally in a certain type of pupil, ring up some of your colleagues in other schools, see what they're experiencing. Feeder schools, look at the numbers there, because obviously if those numbers are going down, then that's going to have a knock-on effect at your school. And again, your agents, they are your extended sales team. Use them, make the most of them, and seek their advice. They are the best source of market intelligence. So now we move on to actually inputting the statistics. Unlike socks in the washing machine, databases will regurgitate precisely what we put in. If it goes in dirty, it comes out dirty. And I can share another example with you here. There was a school that I was doing some work with, cleaning up some of their data as they wanted a new database. And we looked on their feeder school list, and they had 2 pupils from a school called Dame Alice. They also had 3 pupils from a school called the Dame Alice Harper School. A school called D8HS sent 1. Dame Alice Junior sent 4 pupils, and Dame Alice Harper School sent 5. But actually, these were all the same school when we looked at the address. The same one school sending 15 pupils in 1 year. So 5 what seemed to be incidental feeders were actually one quite significant feeder school. So you really need to make sure that there's a consistent approach to the data that you're putting into your database. And equally, if that data goes in clean, it will come out clean. And those sleepless nights wondering if the number of pupils that you expect will be joining the school on the 1st of September 2022 will match the number who arrive will actually become a thing of the past. And now we go and have a look at extracting the statistics. These might be some familiar images that you receive when you extract data from your database. A great peak with lots and lots of data, fantastic. And then another area where there's really no data at all. Can you remove this data? Well, yes, you can and you should before you present it. Don't be lazy about sharing data. Take some time to remove the parts of the story that you do not need for this particular conversation. If the graph evidences the fact that your team was so snowed under that they simply didn't have time to add data in that period, then remove it. However, if the story that you are telling is precisely about the fact that your team was so snowed under and they couldn't upload the database, then leave it in. In addition to the missing data, we'll all be familiar with that rogue piece of data that comes up on the chart. This can be very distracting. That little dot there showing a peak in inquiries could distract the eager governor in your governor's meeting. Why did you suddenly get more inquiries in December? Why did they drop in January? Why didn't we convert them? Well, this will potentially mean that you have to waste your time explaining that it was due to a local competitor school announcing that they were closing and all the inquiries were for Year 9 girls who wished to start immediately and therefore of no real use to you whatsoever. Or perhaps it was because the data shows that you moved the date of your open day to the end of November. But whatever the reason, if it doesn't enhance your story, remove it. Understanding the statistics. Statistics, I love this quote. It's the only science that enables different experts to use the same figures to draw completely different conclusions. Don't waste your time stating the obvious. You will lose credibility. And equally, make sure that your stats can only be interpreted in one way. For example, the statement that cases of COVID in the UK have doubled this month doesn't actually tell us that there are twice as many COVID cases this month, unless we preface it with saying that the same number of people were tested. So now we come to sharing the statistics. The need to share statistics is usually triggered by that wonderful impending governors meeting, that SLT meeting that is sprung on you, or that inset day that's coming at the start of term. Well, don't just leave it for these meetings. Be proactive. Reserve a space perhaps in the common room notice board to enable you to share stats on recent open days, on taster sessions, on recruitment news. This will help you to engage the common room in your pupil recruitment journey. And also, if you're about to do an inset session on the stats, it will warm them up for that inset day. In some cases, it can be really helpful also to equate the number of pupils to the financial value of those pupils. I know a school recently who were struggling to get the international pupil papers marked quickly enough, and consequently there was a delay in getting offers out and they were losing pupils. They'd been putting this story forward, but the perception of the rest of the senior leadership team was it was only 6 pupils, does it really matter? Well, when this is translated into financial terms, I think you will all join me in saying that it has a bigger impact. Now, for example, one Year 9 pupil at this particular school brings in 5 years of full boarding fees. And at £38,000 a year, times 5, that is 190. So that's the number of years. So each year 9 pupil is going to be spending 190,000. An equivalent year 10 pupil who will be at the school for 4 years will bring in 152,000. So we were talking about 2 year 9 pupils. Sorry, we were talking about 4 year 9 pupils and 2 year 10 pupils. Just 6 pupils. And that was equivalent to over £1 million worth of business. Now, needless to say, a week later when I checked up, those papers were getting marked a lot quicker. I'm just going to share at this stage a quick case study on how I use the stats to help me with a particular story that I had when I was working at Shrewsbury School. I have used this example before, but it seems to be well received, so apologies if you've already heard it. But I joined Shrewsbury School in 2012, and my key remit was to fill 3 boarding houses with girls at the start of 2014. So my first job in my first week was to examine where we are now. And basically, I wasn't sure. The data wasn't giving me the information I needed. So we got a new database in very quickly. I was then able to start defining where we wanted to be, consult, explore how we were going to get there, monitor the success in our conversion rates with boys and see if we could expect that that would be similar with girls. Now, on the 1st of September 2012, this is what my target was. I had to get 12 year 9 girls for the first boarding house, 12 in boarding house 2 and 12 in boarding house 3. So I looked at the statistics to see how many had guaranteed, how many had registered, how many had inquired. Well, we had 1 girl for year 9. We had nowhere near enough for registered, and certainly nowhere near enough had inquired. So I really needed a miracle. But actually, in short, I didn't need a miracle. I just needed a really clear strategy with an accompanying tactical plan and buy-in from the rest of the school. So I started to use my new database and churning out stats, year-on-year comparisons, visits, pupils from feeder schools, and so on. And I took great care to remove any distracting data throughout my story while I was doing this work. So, for example, we knew we wanted to diversify the international pupils at the school, but that wasn't the strategic priority, so I took that out. I took out all the data relating to day pupils, apart from day girls joining year 9 in 2014. Now you can see on this slide that we achieved our target through a lot of hard work, and we also had the bonus of getting 10 girls of 14 plus. But you'll notice here I've done something which is a little bit confusing. On the chart earlier on, I put that they were year 9 girls. On this chart, it says 13 plus. And this is something you need to take great care to avoid. Make sure that when you're referring to somebody in your presentation that you keep it consistent, otherwise it can confuse your story. But basically, the end of my little case study is that we met our targets successfully. But not only that, because of the clear stats, I was able to share a story with my governors to prove them that we would need to open an additional 4th girls' house 3 years earlier than we had expected. And this was going to be a really significant change of plan for the governors, because some of the families at the school at that time had experienced a huge amount of change, and they were very averse to putting those families through any further change. And what made it worse was that we weren't talking about having to build a new girls' house. We were talking about having to convert an existing boys' house into a girls' house. But the stats I had and the story I was able to tell was strong enough to be able to convince them that we needed to take this action. Presenting the stats. Now we get to the slightly more interesting part. Showcasing data may seem simple in the age of PowerPoint, Prezi, Canva, Visme, Juicebox, and other quite bizarrely named platforms. But I'm sure many of you can think of a time when you've been confused by a chart you saw in a meeting or at a conference. Have you ever heard the presenter say, well, you probably can't see this diagram properly, but what it's showing is. Now, how you present your data can double or decimate its impact. So take note of the following ways in which you can ensure that your data is illuminated successfully. Now, obviously, we have a lot of people at this talk today, and you will have a wide range of skills in terms of using pivot tables, presentation, and so on. So I can't really do justice to each one of you individually. So this next stage is just a quick whiz through a few of the different options out there for presenting stats. Now, what I suggest is if you've got specific problems, please get in touch with me after this meeting. You can call me, you can email me, and I'll be more than happy to talk through the different products available and how they can be used, and give you tips on how to make sure that you're highlighting the most important parts of your statistical story. So first of all, we have PowerPoint. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is how, if you're creating a PowerPoint, you go to Insert, you go down to Chart, and then there's a sub menu which gives you an option of various types of chart. Once you've selected the chart, you've then got options of different ways of presenting them even further. And this is quite quick if you're in the middle of doing a presentation, you've got some basic stats to include. It means you don't have to go and use another software. You select, for example, Sunburst, and up will come a spreadsheet, which you then populate, or if you prefer, if you've got an Excel spreadsheet that you've exported from your database, you can copy and paste it into this one, and PowerPoint will use this Excel spreadsheet as the reference to create the charts. So here we have an example of how the sunburst will look. Here's one that shows you how line graphs work, and you can see I've just put some basic titles in here saying year 7, year 8, year 10, year 12, and the different years that they're relating to. Again, there's an option to add the numbers on here as well. And this is really quite useful because sometimes you need to know the numbers as well as the percentages. And again, this just shows you that once you've selected bar chart, if you have a look at the top of the screen here, you can see the different types of bar chart that you can use. And that's all just within PowerPoint. Pivot tables. Now, I could spend probably the rest of today and tomorrow on pivot tables, but you'll be pleased to hear that that's not what I intend to do. But if anybody wants a quick whiz through on pivot tables, again, do get in touch. I'm very happy for us to set up a Zoom and just go through the basics. But basically, you have your spreadsheet. You select everything by clicking this little button in the corner, insert your pivot table, which is just here under Insert, and up comes this lovely little grid. Your field names will go into the top here, and they'll mirror the top of your columns. And then you just drag and drop what you want to measure into these little squares here. Very simple overview of a pivot table. Juicebox is one of the many online softwares that are actually free to use, and they can be very useful. I'll just give you a quick image of what sort of thing they look like. Again, you upload one of your existing Excel or CSV export data fields or spreadsheets, and it will put all your different fields in here so that you can click the one you like. Do you want to make one of these into a filter? How do you want to measure them? It enables you to define how they're shown. So for example, dates here are in a sort of more American format. You can change the format in here. And you can actually define what you want to happen to the numbers that are in each field. So again, another way of creating some visually quite attractive graphs. You can then download them and put them into your presentation. Canva as well. I know quite a few of you will be using this to create leaflets and templates or pictures for Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. But Canva also has a lovely section in there which enables you to link some of your data to charts and ways of building infographics quite easily, which is quite useful. Again, instead of linking directly to a spreadsheet, it takes you to a line maker. Oops, let me just go back. It takes you here to its own version of a chart. So you just put your data in and it will present them as a graph. And at the top here, you can decide what typeface you use. You can change the colors, you can animate. And then again, very quickly at the press of a button, you can swap from measuring year groups to years of entry and so on and so forth. So it's pretty user friendly. Illuminating the statistics. Well, there are so many automatically generated reports available now. It's a very different case to how it was when I joined the sector 20 plus years ago. It's quite straightforward to find the story, but shedding light on the data requires some skill. So you've managed to extract all these different types of data from your databases. But make sure that your data is shown clearly. Make sure that you can trust what you're seeing. I think the easiest way for me to explain this is when I was back in school and I was allowed to use a calculator. And one of the first things my maths teacher said to me is, make sure you do the calculation the old way, Catherine, because you need to make sure that you haven't pressed the wrong button when you've been using your calculator and make a silly error because you've just been clumsy in the way that you've been pressing the keys. And I think the same thing applies to the data. Look at it intelligently. If you see a figure that doesn't quite look right on one of these dashboards or reports, just check it. Go back in and make sure that all the data has been recorded properly before you present it. And now I'm going to share a few little skills about the presentation itself. Firstly, make sure your data can actually be seen. It may sound really obvious, but sometimes you are just too close to your presentation, literally. What's legible on your laptop may be far less so when projected on a screen, and your audience will not remember what they can't see. Also, check the font that you've used is available on the computer which will be presenting. If not, you could have some horrible layout issues as your typeface is replaced with a random font, especially if you've got one of those wonderful special school brand typefaces that your school branding company have very unhelpfully selected from an elite range that isn't readily available on a PC. To avoid the debacle of sheepishly translating hard to see numbers and labels on inset day, rehearse your presentation with colleagues who should be placed as far away as your intended audience will be seated. Ask them, can you read this chart? And if the answer is anything other than a firm yes, then redesign it to be easier on the eye. And at this stage, another quick tip from my design days is use dark backgrounds. Dark backgrounds are much easier on the eye and they're far less clinical than a white background on slides. Focus on the key points. In comic book terms, you are Wonder Woman or Superman. Apologies for the men that are in the room. And data is your magic lasso or your web. It's a tool that strengthens your impact but has no value until you apply it purposefully. Don't leave the burden of decoding your data to your audience. It's your job to tell them what it means and how it supports your major points. Data slides are not really about data. They're about the meaning of the data. And it's up to you to make the meaning of each slide clear before you click on to the next. If you don't do this, your audience won't process, let alone buy into your argument. And when you connect the data to your story, you should be using phrases like this. This data shows, this chart illustrates, or these numbers prove. Share one point at a time. The quickest way, believe me, to confuse your audience is by sharing too many details at once. The only data points you should share are those that significantly support your point. Remember the graph I showed you earlier with those rogue dots or that rogue dot on it? Make sure that isn't there. Keep your data in check and keep asking yourself, what is the single most important message I want my audience to extract from this data? And if you have several points to make, demonstrate each individually on separate slides. For example, if your story is that numbers are up significantly, i.e. we had 100 inquiries on this day last year for September 2021 entry, and today we've got 200, and we expect the conversion rate to be the same. Point one, slide one, We know there is classroom capacity, but the numbers relate specifically to boarders. Will we have enough boarding beds? Same point, 100 inquiries on this day last year for September 2021. Today, we have 200 inquiries for September 2022. We expect the conversion rate to be the same, but we need more staff in the department to look after the families through the admissions process, as we know for a fact that families this year are more time consuming to look after due to the understandable concerns over COVID. And this is where we share data from our activity report. So the first one is about performance. The second one proves the fact that activity is up. And as I said earlier, if you haven't input all the inquiries, you can't prove that you're busier than you were this time last year. Label your charts clearly. Whilst you may have been looking at the same statistical graph for weeks or even months, your audience will be exposed to it for mere seconds. Give them the best chance possible to comprehend what they're seeing by using simple, clear and complete language to identify your X and Y axes, your pieces of your bar chart, your bars and your other diagrammatic elements. For example, an automatically generated pivot table in Excel showing the distribution of international pupils by country is actually, from experience, very rarely clear enough to decipher. Perhaps it would be better if you filter the data and run a pivot table showing regions. So perhaps one chart shows Europe, one shows Africa, one shows the Middle East, and put them together on the same page so it's the same chart, but the information is being shared in a clearer way. Try to avoid abbreviations that are not obvious. For example, those names that some schools have relating to the year groups. And also don't assume that labelled components on one slide will then be remembered by your audience on subsequent slides. Some of your audience will be visual learners like me, who process what they see far more successfully than what they hear, and therefore your chart's visual intuitiveness and clarity are absolutely crucial. Highlight the ahas. Every valuable chart or graph has an area where we look and think, aha! It's a number or a range of data that reveals something crucial to your point. Smart presenters explain the relevance of the aha zone verbally and visually. There is actually a great little tool that Microsoft had built called Zoom It, and it allows you to zoom into the screen and circle specific areas by adjusting your mouse. So if I run my mouse over the screen now, it's a standard size. If I had Zoom It loaded, I could press a few buttons on my screen that I program and my cursor would suddenly be huge. And if I press another couple of commands that I pre-program, it would enable it to work as a pencil so that I can circle something on my screen. So if you haven't used it, really useful little Microsoft tool, it's called Zoom It. Use a strong title. Write a title that reinforces the point of the data. Even when data is presented effectively on a slide, the most valuable element of the page is the title, because it's the first element of the slide that the audience will notice and process. Avoid generic titles and instead think about how a title such as year-on-year stats can be elevated to something like increase in conversion ratios between 2019 and 2021. Also, remember to present to your audience. Many presenters look at their slides when they share data as if the slides are the audience. Now, thanks to Zoom, that's actually what I'm doing now. So I'm looking at my slides, but because they're in front of me next to the camera, you don't know I'm doing that. They're not behind me like they would be if I was in the room with you. To deliver your points successfully, look your audience in the eye. Now, this doesn't mean you should stare at them constantly, because I think they might get up and leave the room, but simply imagine you're having a conversation with the audience, a chat in the common room, and glance at the slides from time to time for reference. Storytelling. Telling a story with the statistics. Now, we've spoken so far about how you can present quite mathematical data in a clear and successful way, which could be really useful when you're presenting to your governors. But if you're going to do an inset presentation that you want the common room to remember for a long time, you might like to use a story to explain your stats. So how can we do that? How can we use a story to help to tell the statistical message that we've got from our report that we've just done? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story now about star bars. On this day, 2 years ago, 100 star bars were delivered to my shop. And the following September, 50 of those star bars had been sold, and I had a great profit. Unfortunately, 50 of those star bars had to be returned to the supplier. I didn't get a refund, and it involved quite a lot of work in me trying to send them back to the supplier. On this day 1 year ago, 100 star bars were delivered again, but this time we decided to change the location of the confectionery in the shop. And instead of it being by the door as customers rushed into the shop, we placed the star bars at the checkout. Ah, that old chestnut. Those of you with young children will have experienced that technique. Mummy, can I have one of those? But it works. And last September, all the star bars sold. We had more profit. We had no wasted time sending unsold star bars back to the supplier. Now today, I'm delighted to tell you that I've just had a delivery of 200 star bars. And based on last year's successful conversion, nothing has changed. We expect them all to sell in September. But guess what? I'm going to need some more shelves. I've got nowhere to put these star bars. We also sell Mars bars in our shop, so perhaps we could use the shelf space used by the other sweets. But no, our delivery of Mars bars has also increased, and because they're included in the special 2-for-1 deal. Our customers have also been spreading the news of this new deal, and this has generated even more demand for star bars and Mars bars. So now we need to think further into the future. In the short term, we need more shelves to make sure that we can house the increase in chocolate. But in the longer term, we need more staff as well to stock the shelves. And we need to think about whether we can be more selective in the range of sweets we sell. Or do we become chocolate specialists? Do we even open another shop where we can diversify or focus on doing something special with our chocolate? Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain the analogy there, and it may not be the best example, but it's just something for you to think about before you deliver that inset day next September on stats. How can you make it more appealing? How can you use the power of chocolate to keep your audience connected? So finally, when presented clearly and pointedly, data can elevate the credibility and trustworthiness of your message. Presenting data poorly not only squanders that opportunity, but can damage your reputation as an expert in the field. Like Wonder Woman's lasso or Superman's web, it's a really powerful tool with which to draw out compelling truths. Please wield it wisely. And just before you go and make a cup of tea and scramble around for some chocolate, when creating this story, make sure that the audience can actually relate to the analogy you choose. I followed my own advice this morning and I shared this presentation with my daughter via Zoom, a little practice run through. And at the end, she had one comment. Mum, she said, I've just got one question. What's a star bar? So as soon as this presentation's over, I'm actually going to nip to the co-op in the village and I'm going to buy a star bar and send it to her down at uni down in Brighton. So on that note, thank you for listening. And please, just before you go and find that chocolate and have a cup of tea, have we got any questions?
Kathy, Thank you so much. That was an absolutely great presentation, giving us so many ideas right from start to finish. Nobody can have any excuses now not to present fantastically to their governors. We haven't got any questions right now, Kathy, but I think that's probably because you've given so much opportunity for people to speak to you direct. You've got, your contact details on your slides. For the people listening, those slides will be available on our platform very soon, as will the recording of this presentation. So you can go back through it, because I know I probably want to go back through it and pick up some more tips and ideas. And also all of Kathy's contact details will obviously be on the end of those slides. It just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed to Kathy for that fantastic webinar, and to say thank you to everybody who's been a part of Admissions Connect this week. We really do appreciate you being here, and I hope that you found it informative, enjoyable, interesting and thought-provoking. We'll be back very shortly. Annual conference will be launched very shortly. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Bye.